Jakacharya Stotar Satashi Shiman, His Divine Grace of High Charanana Vibhakta Shri ISKCON BBD Founder Acharya, Save the whole world, Shri Prabhupada Ki, Jai Nitya Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa, Hari Jakacharya Ashto Tarasata Shiman, His Divine Grace of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki, Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur. Brahma Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrindaki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhanaki Brajma Vishya Vrindavanamaki Navadip Mayapur Damaki Pushtam Chatrotam Pujamaki Ganga Maiki Jamuna Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samaveta Bhakta Vrindaki Jainita Gopremani all voices and bodies, all voices and bodies, all voices and bodies, all voices, all voices, all voices, Shri Grun, all voices, Shri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Prabhu?
Yes.
First we have the tradition to read from the Transcendental Diary.
Okay, how long? How long do I read this?
Yeah.
How much?
Paragraph or something, or
Okay.
page.
And where this marker is, huh?
Yes.
Okay. The rest of the paper fleshes out his idea using extensive references from early Bhakti Godhead issues, the Krishna Consciousness Handbook, and to a lesser extent, Srila Prabhupada's books. After attending his afternoon darshan in the temple courtyard, Srila Prabhupada called Jagadish Prabhu into his room and had him read out the whole paper. Professor Kenny's observations are quite perceptive. For the first beginning period from 66 to 67, he describes Prabhupada's role as a composite of a missionary, parent, therapist, friend, Swami, dealing with young Americans disillusioned with the system and searching for the ultimate experience via drugs. Kenny sums up the key features of this relationship succinctly. The early devotees' impressions of the Swami as Acharya, that is, one who teaches by example, and their subsequent conversion from drugs to Krishna consciousness is the most significant fact of this period. He uses quotes from writings by Hayagriva Prabhu to effectively illustrate the spiritual dynamics involved. Swami Bhaktivedanta was the perfect therapist. He never rebuked his charges and seemed to have an infinite store of patience. He also functioned as a surrogate parent, friend, and confidant. Hayagriva Das recalls that in the beginning he was a sage, grandfather, spiritual master, and favourite uncle all rolled into one. It was largely due to Swami Bhaktivedanta's example and sense of mission, we are told, that the early devotees were gradually weaned from drugs. Hayagriva Das claims that for a good part of that first year, some of us who were still walking around in a marijuana stupor, but he had a way of snapping us out of this quickly without ever chastising us. Somehow or other, he whipped us into shape without our ever knowing it. It wasn't that he simply took away our sex and drugs. This would not have been possible. Rather, he engaged us in something sublime. He exhorted us to go out and spread the message of Krishna consciousness. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Aham Pura Bharato Nama Raja. Aham Pura Bharato Nama Raja. Aham Pura Bharato Nama Raja. Vimukta, Drishta, Shruta, Sangha, Bandha, Vimukta, Drishta, Shruta, Sangha, Bandha, Vimukta, Drishta, Shruta, Sangha, Bandha, Aham Pura Bharato Nama Raja. Vimukta Drishta Sutta Sangha Bandha. Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano. Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano. Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano. Brigo Abhavam Mriga Sangad Datarha. Mrigo Bhavam Mriga Sangha Datar Mrigo Bhavam Mriga Sangha Dartata. Mrigo Bhavam Mriga Sangha Dartata. Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano. Mrigo Bhavan Mriga Sangha Dartata. Aham Pura Bharato Nama Raja. Vimukta Drishta Shuta Sangha Bandha Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano Mrigo Bhavang Mriga Sangha Da'ata Ahang Pura Bharata Nama Raja Vimukta Drishta Shuta Sangha Bandha Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano Mrigo Bhavan Mriga Sangha Da'ata
Aham Pura Bhagato Nama Raja Vimukta Drishta Shuddha Sangha Bandha Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano Vrigo Bhagam Mriga Sangha Tatata
Aham Pura Bharata Nama Raja Vimukta Drishta Shuta Sangha Bandha Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano Mriga Bhavam Mriga Sangha Tatha
Aham Pura Bharato Nama Raja Vimukta Drishta Shuta Sangha Bandha Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano Mrigo Bhavam Mriga Sangha Tatataha
Vaishnavis.
Aham Pura Bharato Namaru Raja Vimukta Drishta Shuta Sangha Bandha Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano Mrigo Bhavam Mriga Sangha Dattataha
Ahapura Bharato Nama Raja Vimukta Drishta Shuta Sangha Bandha Aradhanam Bhagavata Ihamano Mrigo Bhavam Mriga Sangha Dartartaha
Aham, I, Pura, formerly, in my previous birth, Bharata Nama Raja, a king named Maharaj Bharata, Vimukta, liberated from, Drishta Shuta, by experiencing personally through direct association, or by getting knowledge from the Vedas. It's interesting how in the transliteration it's comparing the two as gaining knowledge by direct association or knowledge from the Vedas. So it's comparing the knowledge of a devotee, it seems here, the association of a saintly devotee with studying the Vedas. Sangha Bandha, bondage by association. Aradhanam, the worship of Bhagavata, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudev. Ihamana, always performing. Mriga Abhavam, I became a deer. Mriga Sangat, because of my intimate association with a deer. Hatha Artha, having neglected the regulative principles in the discharge of devotional service. Translation. In a previous birth, I was known as Maharaj Bharat. I attained perfection by becoming completely detached from material activities. Through direct experience and through indirect experience, I received understanding from the Vedas. I was fully engaged in the service of the Lord, but due to my misfortune, I became very affectionate to a small deer, so much so that I neglected my spiritual duties. Due to my deep affection for the deer, in my next life, I had to accept the body of a deer. Responsively, in a previous birth, I was known as Maharaj Bharata. I attained perfection by becoming completely detached from material activities through direct experience and through indirect experience. I received understanding from the Vedas. I was fully engaged in the service of the Lord, but due to my misfortune, I became very affectionate to a small deer. So much so that I neglected my spiritual duties. Due to my deep affection for the deer, in my next life, I had to accept the body of a deer. So this is a wonderful statement by Bharat Maharaj. And also we see here, he's making this point that due to my misfortune, and this is the meditation, obviously, of a greatly advanced devotee, because as I was discussing last night, the materialistic person is thinking when they get so many material benedictions, call them benedictions or boons, they think they're very fortunate. They think, oh, this is great, I'm getting everything I want in life. But for a devotee to have these so-called material benefits or gains or whatever that will distract us or cause us to forget Krishna, this is a very unfortunate situation. And even we see someone, we were in Gauradesh the other day, so one of the Vaishnavis there was giving a class, and she was discussing this prayer by the gopis, wherein they're cursing Lord Brahma because he made eyelids. And just because they blink for a moment, and just for that moment they can't see Krishna, and therefore they think the eyelids are pretty useless. But this is the mood of the devotee, is that obviously advanced devotee, that anything that is a distraction from Krishna or anything that stops me from connecting with or thinking about Krishna, this is a very unfortunate thing. It's a very it's a very negative thing for the devotee. So he's saying here that this was actually misfortune, that he gave up the service of the Lord. The incident herein described is very significant. In a previous verse it is stated, Vina mahat pada rojo bhishekam. One cannot attain perfection without smearing the dust from the lotus feet of an exalted devotee on his head. And it's interesting, and it's two verses previous, I think, in verse 12, he uses this word abhishekam. So as we know, abhishek means to bathe. And the point that Bharat or Jad Bharat's making here is one needs to bathe himself in the dust of the lotus feet of the devotees. So this is a really interesting statement. So does that mean we go around the floor and we scrape up all the dust and we should throw it all over our bodies? Is that what it means to take to bathe in the dust of the lotus feet of devotees? So Prabhupada was asked that question, what it actually means to bathe in the dust of the lotus feet of devotees, and he explained that it's actually to take shelter of the instruction that are coming from the lips of the greatly advanced souls. So this is bathing in the dust, because the dust of the lotus feet is actually the instruction. And we see in the Vedic text, it talks about how receiving instructions from a great soul, this is the actual means of escaping this difficult material situation. By hearing instructions. And we see also here in the verse, it's comparing, or Prabhupada is comparing this drishta shuta, by experiencing personally or personally through direct association, or by getting knowledge from the Veda. So, and we see also, what is it? There's a verse in the Chaitanya Srimad, I don't remember the verse right now, but it's explaining there's two types of Bhagavatas. There's the book Bhagavata, and there's the person Bhagavata, and it compares them as the same, and the benefit of it the same. But actually, the person Bhagavata is more important than the book Bhagavata, in the sense that the person Bhagavata helps us to understand how to live our life according to the book Bhagavata, because through this association of the saintly souls, we can understand how to be a devotee, how to apply devotional service in our life. And we see in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it also explains, it says, Sadhu Sangha, Sava Shastra Koi, Lava Matra Sadhu Sangha, Sava Siddha Hoy. That is the verdict of all the revealed scriptures, that even by a moment's association. And it defines a lava as an 11th of a second. So just by this moment's association, very short time association with a greatly advanced devotee, that one can achieve all perfections in life. And of course, we're not talking about material perfections, we're talking about spiritual perfections. So what does this mean to get them a moment's association? It's the same thing, because we often see devotees, especially younger devotees, a hankering to be with a guru, or hankering to be with the advanced devotees. But the real essence of devotee association is not the vapu, it's not the form, but it's actually the vani, it's the instructions. Because by the instructions of the greatly advanced devotees, there's a verse earlier on in the Bhagavatam where it talks about how the instructions of the Bhagavata is like this knife that cuts through a knot, the Hridaya Granthi, it cuts the knot of attachment that's there in the heart. And we see this is really pertinent or relevant in this section here, because we go back a few verses and look at the way that Jad Bharat is instructing Rahuka. He's just cutting through all his ignorance. He said, he's basically saying, you're a fool. You think you're a king, but actually this body is just a transformation of material elements. It's just the same as the palanquin carriers. Their body is the transformation of material elements. The palanquin, it's the transformation of material elements. And also you, who are foolishly thinking yourself a king. This kingly body is just a transformation of material elements. So he's using very, very strong words to cut the knot of attachment. And we see, throughout the Bhagavatam, there's so many wonderful stories or wonderful, pastimes are being described there. And we see that, especially, devotees like Narad Muni, and here we see Jad Bharat, but, these saintly devotees, even we see Prahlad Maharaj, when they're talking, or presenting the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, sometimes they need to talk in a very, very strong, a bold way to cut through the ignorance. And it reminds me a little bit of when I was a young man. I used to do a lot of swimming, and so in Australia everyone swims. It's just like, there's water everywhere. If you're not swimming, you're going to drown at some point. And I remember doing some life-saving training, and one of the things they used to teach us in life-saving training was that if someone's drowning, you have to go save them. Generally what happens, if you swim up to the front of them, they'll see you, and because they're panicking, they'll just sort of try to climb on top of you and push you under the water. They don't think because of the fear of losing their life. So what they teach you to do is to swim up from behind, and then you hit them to sort of shock them out of the fear, and then you can you can save them. So it's like that. The drowning man needs to be shocked to awareness of the situation, so that they don't panic. And in the same way, when a person is steeped in ignorance of thinking, that they're this material body, and ultimately, we hear in the scriptures about avidya, or this vidya means knowledge. Avidya is the opposite of knowledge. It's darkness, but the ultimate manifestation of that avidya is to think that we're this material body. And this is what Jad Bharat, he's just smashing this ignorance in the heart of Rahugana by his very, very strong instructions. And Rahugana, we see Rahugana here, he actually comes to his awareness, or at least he comes to some understanding that yes, what you're saying is true, and if I can act according to your instructions, then I'll become actually peaceful and happy in life. Let's see, read on a little bit. If one always follows the orders of the spiritual master, there is no question of falling down. As soon as a foolish disciple tries to overtake his spiritual master and become ambitious to occupy his post, he immediately falls down. Yasha prasada bhagavat prasado, yasha aprasada nagati kutopi. If the spiritual master is considered an ordinary man, the disciple surely loses his chance to advance further. There's also a verse in the Tadvigana tam sagarmeva samit panishot. No, that's not the verse. What is it? Tasmat gurum prapadyate gigyasu seri mutama in the 11th canto. No, that's not the verse either. Anyhow, there's a verse, I can't remember where it's from, where it's explaining that one should not consider the spiritual master to be an ordinary man, because actually he's the representative of all the devatas. And Acharya Mambajana Yunavaya Naramata Surguya Savadeva Maya Guru, that how he's you never consider the spiritual master to be an ordinary man, because actually he's the representative of all the demigods, and he's able to deliver transcendental knowledge. And Prabhupada's pointing out here, if we consider the Guru to be an ordinary person, and it's a really interesting situation, because if we look at those devotees, at least in this day and age, who are serving in the role of initiating gurus, and if you look at their background, you'll think, well, they came from a background similar to me, so how is it that they're any different? And this is a common kind of pitfall that devotees experience, is to think that their guru, because they come from an ordinary background, they're just an ordinary person. But it's explained by the acharyas, explained in the scriptures. Srila Prabhupada explains in his conversations, letters and things, in so many different ways, how a person who takes on this service of initiating disciples, or not even initiating disciples, one who takes on takes it as their life's mission to spread the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then they're understood to be not on this platform of being an ordinary person, because they're connected with the absolute truth. There's a letter where Prabhupada's explaining this, and he said because someone gives their life to canvassing on behalf of the Supreme Person of God, therefore they become glorified. It's not necessarily because of the person on their own, because we see sometimes when people leave that service, or when they give up the principles of Krishna consciousness, then they're no longer glorified. And the reason being is because of this connection with Krishna. Everything in connection with Krishna is glorious. Everything that is separate from Krishna is unimportant. So when one gives their life to canvassing on Krishna's behalf, and we see that when devotees take up the service, they perform great austerities, undergo great difficulties in order to spread Krishna consciousness. And this sacrifice, this struggle to spread the mission of Krishna, this is glorious. And therefore the person who takes to that activity becomes glorious in themselves. And Prabhupada's making the point here is if the spiritual master is considered an ordinary man, the disciple surely loses his chance to advance further. So there's a very, very risky kind of mindset to have, is to think that someone who's giving their life to spread Krishna consciousness is just an ordinary person. And we see even in Srila Prabhupada's pastimes, there was some of his disciples actually thought he was an ordinary person. And of course we understand those devotees are no longer around anymore. And even there was a story one time that when Srila Prabhupada was staying, I think he was staying at John Lennon's house in London, in the UK. And at that time, the people were so-called landing on the moon. And Srila Prabhupada, he was speaking very strongly and plainly, saying that that's not the moon, they're going somewhere else. Maybe it's Rahu or something like that, because he said, where are the people, where are the houses, according to the scripture in the scripture, there's people living on the moon. So Srila Prabhupada said it wasn't the moon. And this one devotee who was there, I think his name is Purushottam, he was a bit of a scientific type, and he kind of believed in what the scientists would tell him, and he couldn't accept that the men weren't landing on the moon. He just couldn't accept that, and because he was questioning Prabhupada and Prabhupada's knowledge that he was presenting from the Vedas, he actually gave up Krishna consciousness and went away. So it's imperative for us, and actually Prabhupada, he makes the point. He was reading Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's comments on, I think it's a verse from the 13th chapter. You know which verse it was, Melanie? So Prabhupada makes this point that he was reading Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's comments on a Bhagavad Gita verse, and as I said, I think it's the 13th chapter. And in that verse, that commentary, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur is saying how the disciple needs to accept the instructions of the spiritual master as his life and soul. To make, and there's that chittete koriya aikya, to make the heart one with the instruction of the spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada said that was like a turning point for him in his yeah. Where's that verse from? Second chapter. Okay. Oh, there's a verse in the 13th chapter. Prabhupada was saying how he felt, for him that was a turning point in his Krishna consciousness, because he understood this concept of accepting the instructions of the spiritual master as being the way to become Krishna conscious, to give up this material existence. And Prabhupada's saying here, he's quoting that verse, Yasha Prasada, Bhagavat Prasada, Yasha Prasadam Nagati Katopi, that, if we take shelter of the instructions of the spiritual master, we receive the mercy of the spiritual master, then we can achieve the mercy of Krishna. But if we don't receive the mercy, it says Yasha Aprasadam. So if you don't receive the mercy of the spiritual master, Nagati Kutopi, you don't achieve the supreme destination. Nagati, no destination. So we stay here in this material world. So it's a very, very important element in the spiritual path, is to take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master. And we see also in the Gita, Krishna explains the same point in the 4th chapter, where he talks about he's tadvidi pranipatena pariprasthena sevya upadekshantite jnana jnanajas tatvadarshana. That you take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, inquire from him, render service unto him. The self-realized soul, he can impart transcendental knowledge to you. Why? Tattva darshana, because he's seeing the truth. So when one, if one can't see the truth, if one is not aware of the truth or doesn't understand the truth, how can they lead you on the spiritual path? It's just like an analogy sometimes given, is that if you're bound hand and foot, someone who's also bound cannot undo the ropes. You need someone who's free, whose hands aren't tied up, then they can undo the ropes. And so the spiritual master, or the great transcendentalist, is also in this position because they're no longer bound by the modes of material nature. So when we're seeking guidance from someone in the spiritual path, we need to find that person who is freed from the modes of material nature. And this is why we're very fortunate here in that we have all these books from Srila Prabhupada, where he's guiding us very clearly on the path of spiritual life. And it's obvious, it's apparent to us all that Srila Prabhupada is not influenced by the modes of material nature. He's come to this point of being transcendental to the modes of material nature. Therefore, when he gives instructions, these instructions are not influenced by the defects that we all experience. You know, we have imperfect senses, we make mistakes, we cheat. You know, we all have the same basic imperfections. But when one is freed from the influence of modes of material nature, you know, no longer subject to these different imperfections. Despite a very rigid life of devotional service, Bhakt Maharaj did not consult the spiritual master when he became overly attached to a deer. And this is the essence, it's Prabhupada's neglect of the instructions of his spiritual master. He became attached to this deer, and he did not want to, or he did not think to consult with an advanced transcendentalist to understand what was going on. And as a result, he fell down. He became attached to the deer. When he gave up his life, he was meditating on this deer. He was thinking, "Where's the deer? I hope the deer's okay." And with this thought process going through his mind, he left his body. And it's the same. We're all in the same situation. If we develop attachment for anything in this material world, then the risk is that at the point of death, that attachment will come, because the things that you're attached to, the things you hold dear, these are the types of things that are going to flood into your mind at occasions of risk or danger. These things will come into your mind. So at the point of death, if we have some deep material attachments, it's most likely that these things are going to come flooding into our consciousness, and therefore we will see, just like in that story of what's his name, Paranja becomes a woman in his next life because he had this deep attachment to his wife that in his next life he took birth as a woman. And the same as, you know, if a woman has deep attachment for a man, the next life they'll take birth as a man. And you may, you know, we may think, well, you know, to be born as a man is a good thing, to be born as a woman is a good thing. No, because it's a birth in this material world. It's actually not very helpful. It's not very, you know, useful in the long run. Ultimately, what we want to do is to leave this material place and go back to Krishna's abode. And the process of Krishna consciousness, taking shelter of the instructions of a bona fide spiritual master, whether Diksha or Siksha or whatever, is going to enable us to give up these material attachments. Because this is what's causing us difficulty, and this is what Judd Bhart's explaining to Rahugana here, is that because of your false identification with your material body, because of your attachments in this material world, you're not going to experience satisfaction. You're always going to experience frustration. And as long as we identify with this material world, we're always going to be experiencing frustration. But it's only through the instructions of a transcendentalist. And we see here that Judd Bhart is obviously a very great transcendentalist. And, you know, it's a particularly interesting pastime because it's quite unusual that someone will have a recollection of their past lives. But by Krishna's arrangement, you know, Bhart had this understanding of who he was in his previous two lives in order that this pastime could unfold. So we see often it happens in these stories in the scriptures where these are mostly happening under the influence of Krishna's Yoga Maya. Even though it seems like, you know, he was deluded by Mahamaya, we can see that ultimately it was under Krishna's internal potency because, you know, you look at the conclusion. He when he went from his birth as Bhart Maharaj into the body of a deer, he remembered in his past life he was Bhart Maharaj. That's extraordinary that an animal can remember its past life. That doesn't happen normally. But in this occasion, it happened because Krishna was, you know, using his life to tell the story, to help, you know, personalities like Rahugana achieve liberation. So it's quite an amazing story, and the outcome of it is also quite amazing. And so last sentence. Consequently, he became strongly attached to the deer, and forgetting his spiritual routine, he fell down. So we have to be careful of this in this world. is it doesn't matter, what things we have in life or what comes into our life. We need to avoid the tendency to become attached. And it's just like there's a purport in the Gita where Srila Prabhupada talks about the tendency of the living entity in this material world. And he uses this phrase of Maitunya Agara, meaning like the shackles of sex life. But then what he explains is it's just like water. The water has a tendency to go downwards. Like if I pour water here, it won't just stay there because it's on a slope. It'll go down, and then it might even go down on the floor. And if I pour a lot of water, it'll probably go down the floor and down the stairs and out the front door. So its tendency is to go down. And so he explains that also the living entity in material consciousness also has this tendency to go down. So the only solution, or the only way to overcome that, is to become completely fixed in the spiritual energy. As long as we're connected with the material energy, as long as we're attached to material energy, it will pull us down. And we see here, Bharat Maharaj, he, because he wasn't completely free from the influence of material nature, it's described in the previous chapter how he was at the level of bhava, which means even at the level of bhava, which is a very, very elevated level of devotional service, still there is a possibility of falling down. Once one achieves prema, it practically doesn't happen that one can fall down. But at the level of bhava, even though very, very advanced, still because of some remnant of attachment in this material world, he fell down. And what to speak of devotees like ourselves who are in a much lower state of devotional service, the possibility of us falling down is quite great. But if we take shelter of Krishna, and this point is also spelt out by Krishna to Arjuna in the Gita, it says Dayavisha Gunamaya Mama Jaratana Mame Vijay Prapadante Mayam Mutam Sanatite. He explains that this divine energy of mind consisting of three modes of material nature is very difficult. This duratya is very difficult to overcome. But mame vijay prapadyante mayam mitam taranti. But one who takes shelter of me can easily cross beyond it. So this is the key to overcoming the difficult situation in this material world. On your own, and there's what's that? Matina Krishna Paratosvatova Mitopi Padet Grihavatana Madanta Gopi Vishatam Tamisham Puna Punas Chavita Chana. This interesting verse from the Bhagavatam is pointing out that like persons who are attached or completely addicted to enjoying this material world by their own endeavors, by the endeavors of others, or by a combination of both, they cannot overcome this consciousness unless one's willing. There's another verse that is also Na te vidu swatakatim hi Vishnum. Unless one's willing to accept that Vishnu or Krishna is the ultimate goal of life and to dedicate themselves to this goal, they'll never know. They'll never understand what the supreme destination is. They'll never overcome the influence of modes of material nature. And this is the condition of the position of living entities in this material world. Unless they're willing to take shelter of Krishna, unless they're willing to practice devotional service, they'll never overcome this position in the material world. And the same's there for us. Unless we're willing to give our life to this process completely, unless we're willing to give up our attachments to this material world and take shelter fully of Krishna, we'll take birth again, and again, and again, and again. The only solution is to take full shelter of Krishna, take full shelter of the instructions of the great devotees, and at the end of this life, we return back to it. And Krishna says this, he says, Purna Janmana Vidyate, that if you take shelter of this process of bhakti, if you take shelter of the instructions of the great souls, Purna Janmana Vidyate, you don't take birth again in this material world, but you go back to the spiritual realm. And that's the process of bhakti, that's the fruit of the process of bhakti, is return to the spiritual world. Okay, not sure how long I'm supposed to go for. I'll finish there. Any questions at all? Any comments? Really, Manohar Prabhu.
Could you speak about highlight the subtlety of spiritual energy. In other words, there's this saying, in like an eagle and out like a plough. Bharat was firmly fixed, but what seemed like an innocent or seemed like a good thing, he was giving shelter to a deer, so it was very slight deviation at first, and then it kind of led him to fall down. So.
Yeah, it's just Srila Prabhupada sometimes he would refer to spiritual life like cutting with like shaving with a cutthroat razor. I remember that the first few times I went to India, I used to go to the barber and get them to shave my head and shave the throat sometimes, and it's quite a scary experience because it's got this like open blade, it's just a razor sharp, and they're shaving your throat, and you just do it like that, and you think, gosh, one slip and I'm dead, and that's what it's like in spiritual life. It's like one slip and there's blood, especially even like in advanced stage, but especially in the beginning stages of devotional service, we have to be so careful. But it's the same there for an advanced devotee. Is you have to be so careful, and sometimes we see that material nature puts allurements on the path to test the sincerity of the devotee. So there's so many pitfalls, if you like. If we're not careful, if we kind of just go blindly through life without being observant and looking out for the various pitfalls that can be there, then it's very easy for one to have trouble. But if we're attentive, and the attention is especially pertinent in the process of hearing and chanting. If we're attentive to our hearing and chant, to hearing the name, if we're attentive to hearing the Bhagavatam, if we're attentive in the way we associate with devotees, meaning we there's guya makyati prichati, we inquire from devotees, and we also reveal our minds to devotees, then we're going to be protected by the process of bhakti. But if we're inattentive, and this is the point that Prabhupada makes, when you're shaving with a cutthroat razor, if you're inattentive, one slip, there's blood. And that's what it's like in spiritual life. If we're inattentive, then it can become very, very dangerous, very risky. So, and actually, Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Harinam Chintamani, he also points out that the root of all offences in chanting the holy name is inattention. So we can see, right across the spectrum in devotional practices, to be as attentive as we can to ensure that we're, practicing in a proper way. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Prabhu?
Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. I would like to ask you, please, may you put a bit more explain about the point what you mentioned in the class, to take shelter by instructions of the Guru, the Shiksha or Diksha, for younger, for elder devotees, but to understand the point, the importance.
Yeah, it's just like devotional service is not like a do-it-yourself process. I don't know if you have that concept here in Germany. Like in Australia, they have these big chain of hardware stores, and they sell all these what they call DIY kits, do-it-yourself. You go into the shop, you buy this kit. There's a set of instructions, or like you go to IKEA, and you buy furniture and you put it together yourself. It's got a set of instructions, do it yourself. And it's kind of funny, because we've got a few IKEA things at home, and for me, I just put them together. They're very simple. But I have a friend. He's passed away now, but he asked me to come around his house one day. And I got there. I didn't know why he wanted to come, so I got there and said, "Can you put that together for me?" He had this IKEA wardrobe or something. He couldn't figure out how to put together, even though the instructions were there. So spiritual life is very much like that. It's not a do-it-yourself process. You can't just pick up the Bhagavatam or pick up the Bhagavad Gita and read it without guidance and expect to understand what it's talking about. Because we see so many people have done that. So many people have taken Bhagavad Gita and read it on their own and given their own interpretation. And as Prabhupada explained when he first came to the United States, he said, there were, I think he said 700 or 800 editions of Bhagavad Gita available in the world, but not one pure devotee resulted. And now, one simple person, he's saying, has explained Bhagavad Gita, so many pure devotees have come. So it's just like, without the instruction of the spiritual master, without following the instruction of the spiritual master, as Prabhupada's quoting here, Nagati Katopi, you don't achieve the supreme destination. You have no destination without following the instructions of a bona fide spiritual master. And I'm not talking about just Diksha, because the instructions come from Siksha. The Diksha, Prabhupada explains, is just a formality. And he gives the analogy of just like when you go to a university or a higher education college, the first thing you do is you register. Yeah, that's like Diksha, is the registration. Then once you've registered, you become qualified to receive the instruction or to go to the classes in the college. So in the same way, once you take shelter of the process and you receive Diksha, then Siksha follows as a result of that. It may be the same person, it may be a different person. But the Siksha is the essence of learning, because when you receive the instructions, you apply the instructions in your life, then you make advancement. Because essentially, what is the Guru telling you to do? He's telling you, give up your material attachments. He's telling you how to give up your material attachments also. He's explaining what material attachments are. He's also explaining how they affect us. And he's giving the path of how to give up these attachments. And also take shelter of Krishna. So this is why it's so important to receive instruction, is because we don't understand. We don't even, let's face it, we don't even understand the basics. We're not this body. If we take the time to carefully analyze and look at ourselves, you can see, I'm convinced I'm this body, 100% convinced. And all I have to do is look at the way I act. So through the instructions of advanced devotees, we can start to see the truth, and then by applying those instructions in our lives, we can start to realize the truth, and then we can start to act, in a way that demonstrates our realization. So it's essential. You cannot make progress in spiritual life without the guidance of advanced devotees, and that's why it's always so important to have that connection, even when we're ourselves, so-called advanced devotees. You look at our acharyas, and you'll always see they had others they would take guidance from. Srila Prabhupada, he would consult with his godbrothers. He didn't always follow what they said, but he would still consult. And he would discuss things with his godbrothers. We see that, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he associated with Jagannath Das Babaji, and he took guidance from him. We can see the same with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He would take guidance from his father. He'd take guidance from Jagannath Das Babaji. From Gokul Das Babaji. So we see, even with the great acharyas, even you look at the 6 Goswamis, they're also taking guidance. Jiva Goswami is taking guidance from Sanatana Rupa Goswamis. Sanatana Rupa Goswami is taking guidance from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, from Sruta Damodar Goswami, from Ramananda Roy. So you can see that always there needs to be guidance. There needs to be, we need to be following guidance in spiritual path. And this is what Prabhupada says. This is where Bharat went wrong. He didn't have that guidance, and he wasn't sufficiently advanced to progress in spiritual path, on the spiritual path without guidance. That's right.
Maybe a following question: is it possible, or better said, how it is possible to help devotees who don't like to take up instructions or try to skip off of the instructions? Is it possible to help, or how, or often we have such situations?
Yeah, the reason we don't like to take instructions is because of false ego. We think that we know everything, But I remember, I was telling Mer the other day, my grandfather used to have lots of really interesting sayings. And one of the things he would say is the person who thinks he knows everything will never learn anything. You can't teach a fool. If you think you know everything, it means you're a fool. So you can't teach a fool. But even with people who aren't ready to take shelter of a spiritual master or a spiritual guide, if you like, by applying themselves to the process of bhakti, the false ego will become diminished. Just by chanting Hare Krishna, Prabhupada explains, I think it's the purport in the 10th chapter of the Gita, that chanting Hare Krishna destroys the false bodily concept of life. So by even taking shelter of the holy name, even though they're not ready, because it's just a matter of when a person's ready. So even though they're not ready to take shelter of initiating spiritual master or a Siksha guru, whatever, if they still apply themselves to the process of bhakti, at some point in the future, this life, the next life, whatever, they'll get to the point of being ready, qualified to take shelter of a spiritual guide. It's a process, and like we're all at different stages of advancement on the process. Some are ready for certain things, some are not. But by giving them your association, by giving them your guidance and encouragement, it's like I know by Sheshikapur, one thing he often says is you just encourage the heck out of everyone. So the idea is just to be very encouraging, and through this encouragement, I saw you saw that thing I sent the other day, Merlin? It's just by a positive attitude towards people, by being encouraging towards people, they'll achieve things you just didn't know they could. So it's just like when you feel you're in a protected, a sheltered environment, you feel more inclined to extend yourself. But if you feel it's like an unsheltered, unprotected environment, you're not going to try hard because one might get hurt. So with people who are not willing at this point in their lives to take shelter, if they feel protected, because one of the reasons people don't want to take shelter or put their trust in someone else is because their trust has been betrayed so many times in their lives, either through their parents, through their friends, through whatever. They've been betrayed. And therefore they think, well, I'm not going to do this anymore, this is not worth it. So we need to, as preachers of Krishna consciousness movement, we need to help people build faith, build trust. And so we also, and this is why it's really important, the idea of confidentiality is like when a person, I've had so many experiences, I'm sure we've all had these experiences where we reveal our mind, so something's going on in our life, we reveal our mind to someone, and before you know it, everyone in the temple knows about it. Or everyone on, every devotee on Facebook knows about it, because the lack of confidentiality. So, and this is a really important element of building trust. And this is why we see, Rupa Goswami, he talks about in the Upadeshamrita about, revealing the mind in confidence. So this is part of a loving relationship with a Vaishnava, and part of that loving relationship is also honouring that confidence, honouring that trust. And so, through exchanges like, as Rupa Goswami pointed out, we can build confidence, we can build trust in devotees, but all in aspiring devotees. But also we have to nurture that trust or nurture that relationship or that bhakti by having a relationship built on integrity and not just trying to exploit them or not honouring their trust. It's a really important thing is to build people's trust and faith in the process of bhakti, and that then will help them to feel safe, to be able to trust. Because that's usually why people don't trust, is they just don't feel safe. That's why they won't put their lives in the hands of someone. Because when you take shelter of a spiritual guide, you are in effect putting your life in their hands. And if they're not qualified to do that, we see disaster results. There's so many stories of it even talks in the Bhagavatam about, when people take shelter of someone who's not qualified to be a spiritual master, it's like being on a lead ship. And the lead ship sinks, the lead boat, it sinks to the bottom of the ocean because it's too heavy. So it's just, we have to become qualified to give shelter, and then also when people take shelter, we have to honour that. So, and that's why we see earlier on in the fifth chapter of this canto, Rishabh Dev talks about, who's qualified And the essence of who's qualified is that person, to be a guru, to be a father, to be a mother, to be a demigod, to be a king, whatever. The essence of it is you're capable of delivering your dependence from the cycle of birth and death. So whenever we take on any kind of leadership role, especially in a spiritual organization, it's not just a mundane leadership role where you get the job done. It's like, whether you're a temple president or you're a Sankirtan leader or a GBC or whatever, you need to be able to guide people on the process of bhakti so that they can ultimately achieve liberation from this material world. So taking on, services or responsible services, it's a big responsibility. So we have to, and even though we may not be, so perfectly equipped, if we receive these different services, we need to focus on trying to become qualified to deliver people from the cycle of birth and death. Because that's what it's really about, taking on any kind of leadership positions to deliver people. So lotus feet of Krishna. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you very much.
Subal Gopal Prabhu.
Thank you for a nice lecture. I would like to ask this point also from the perspective of a younger devotee, what can help to take more deeply shelter and adjust to the instructions of the seniors or the guru?
I guess really it just comes from hearing and chanting. And there's a really interesting purport in the I think it's the 5th verse of the first chapter of the Bhagavatam. And Srila Prabhupada, he makes the point there, he said to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam and to speak the Srimad Bhagavatam is more important than reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the idea of hearing and chanting, Prabhupada's reinforcing this idea of hearing and chanting. And then if we go up to the last canto of the Bhagavatam, the idea of hearing and chanting is really strongly emphasized. So it's just like, whenever, devotees are aspiring to get initiated, if they're intelligent and if they're following the process, in the best possible way, they'll hear from people, they'll hear from senior devotees. So, to looking for that person who inspires them in the process of bhakti. Because this is the essence of the process of bhakti, is hearing and chanting. By hearing the transcendental knowledge, the knowledge, it's not like it just goes into your ear and it sort of rattles around your brain for a little while and then you regurgitate it to someone else. No, if you actually hear transcendental knowledge, it goes to the heart, it purifies the heart. And when the heart becomes purified, the self becomes revealed. So transcendental knowledge is a very, very powerful way of purifying the heart of the conditional humanity. So, if we want to develop faith in devotees, we need to hear from them. And by hearing, by hearing someone speak, you can understand the person. And a transcendentalist will only speak about Krishna. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Salveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi Gaur. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.